So, initially, I was going to lead into this with the video on SHMUPS that have had an impact on me, but going down the rabbit hole of re-releases, so on and so forth, like, not even that they've never gotten re-releases, but the options for re-release were taken away, stuff like that. That sort of stuff left a sour taste in my mouth, and I'd rather not subscribe to sunk cost fallacy. And instead of doing something I couldn't dredge up the motivation to do, I'd rather just move on to the next video, which is something I know I'll enjoy doing. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous about being able to do it justice. Yeah, I got a bit dorky with it. Don't worry, take that as a sign, a harbinger of things to come in this video. But while we will otherwise be starting with Zeroranger, let's take a look at the game developers themselves, System Erasure. System Erasure is basically comprised of two people from Finland. Obviously, there's more to it than that, but we'll get to it when we go to Zeroranger. However, they do have a press page, and I do at least want to point out a few things. The first of which is that eesh, yes, it's a little weird, but for the record, it seems like the alternative is calling him ugh, bro. He does seem to be the one being more of the front man, the person to handle a lot of relations. So if you wind up the one that stumbles upon this video, sorry about that. Sorry if I butchered anything. The other thing that I want to read is this chuny-ass history section because, whew, it's something. It is the year 2000 and X. Unbeknownst to many, two peculiar individuals meet in a small gaming forum. Through a shared passion, these lunatics unite their non-existent talents and take their first feeble steps into game development. Now, almost a decade later, their very first project finally crawls out of the primordial soup, formed by a simple question uttered long, long ago. Which brings us to Zeroranger. So Zeroranger is a shoot-'em-up made by those two aforementioned people who also, like me, really love shoot-'em-ups. But this game also kind of started as a freeware title called Final Boss, which, while not important to this video in particular, I do want to point that and the fact that they still let you download this game on their website because it's a pretty cool thing to do. But Zeroranger is available on all major storefronts, as well as the indie darling of itch.io. There's also a Switch homebrew version that I intended to use as the main source of footage because I've been planning this video for a really long time. It's more, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to do this game justice at the times I've been planning it, but here we are now, and unfortunately, the Switch homebrew version doesn't work for me anymore. But it does exist, and if you could get it to work, there you go. But Zeroranger itself involves you taking control of one of two mechs to defeat the Green-Orange Army invading Earth. The first is named Rib, and the second is Decker, and oh gods. Look, we're hitting our first tangent here, okay? This is a funny one. This innocuous-looking crate of grapefruit juice, where this game's mechs get their names from, sent me down a little bit of a rabbit hole. So one of my ideas was to, since I'm in an area that allows me to get a hold of a lot of import goods, try to track this specific brand of grapefruit juice down as a wink and a nod. But it was kind of a no-go. One Discord server I'm in does actually have a Finnish person in it, so I did ask them about it, and it turns out they've stopped making Ribbon Deckers for quite a while. But what led to the decline is what makes me go on this tangent. You see, the decline of Ribbon Deckers began when people began complaining it was too sweet, because they started adding sugar to it. To which any American would just look at that and go, isn't that what they do with most of our drinks? And yeah, they effectively tried to Americanize this drink in essence, and it kind of failed. And to me, that's fucking amazing, and now the only legacy they have is just these two mechs and a shoot-'em-up named after it. Alright, let's use the last of my rib B-roll from... Holy crap, 2020. That's how long I've been sitting on this. While I'm going to be omitting stuff like plot, because yes, there is plot, I will be going into the experience. And while Zeroranger is my former favorite game of all time, don't worry, we'll talk about that, it is still my second favorite game of all time. If you're not fine with that being spoiled, or if you wind up wanting to experience all this for yourself, please buy this game. While I personally think this game is marvelous and absolutely worth the full asking price of $10, for the cost conscious, I will at least point out that I have seen this game on sale quite a bit, and I've seen it in multiple itch.io emergency event bundles. It is a genuinely fantastic game, and one that I would absolutely throw the spoiler warning up on before I go into anything else. So with that out of the way, the Zeroranger experience starts with me immediately pausing the footage and going on a tangent. Look, I promise this one is mostly relevant. So at the very beginning, System Erasure games, from what I've seen from all two of them, have this little thing where they like to show you a slight bit of their hand of what they're cooking. This tree right here is called a Bodhi tree, with the scientific name of, I'm not joking here, Ficus religiosa. It is a tree that is omni-important to some, I don't know how to classify it, spiritualist movement or religion. Put a pin in it though, because we'll be back to that point. Though I did find out that my country does have 3 Bodhi trees here. Maybe next time I'm down that way I'll get some footage or a picture. With that tangent over though, Stage 1 begins by teaching you to shoot orange things for extra points, and another sleight of the head by using old Devanagari numbers for stage numbers. Devanagari numbers, for anyone who isn't a linguistics nerd, are a set of numbers used in languages like Sanskrit and Hindu. It also does a good job at showing the fact that this is an unabashed love letter to shoot-'em-ups with its mini-boss of legally distinct Vic Viper, or Arcadder. Things don't really get strange until the first boss. The boss, though, is where it gets a little more interesting. You see, Zeroranger likes to use a lot of what I'll call Toaplanisms. Toaplan in this case being a developer of shoot-'em-ups that had a very specific style with some of their games. Skulls and eyes everywhere. When you get bosses to their second phase, they'll usually lose a bit of armor and have either some eye or some teeth staring straight at you. In any game, these little subtle touches, as well as the fact that the music pitch shifts, it's the little things that make a game shine a lot more. Regardless, when you clear a stage, you get a choice of one of 2 power-ups within gems to take as a new weapon. Stage 2 is more of the same, so let's talk about the game's, well, resolution. It's long and skinny, but it's like a lot of arcade games back then that use something called Tate mode, or if you watch a few other YouTubers, Tate mode. We'll be using the Tate mode pronunciation because it is correct, and it just literally means vertical. So usually, the monitors that were used with this were flipped vertically. Obviously, this means the vertical resolution was a lot greater, as well as the fact that, for those that had monitors that could do it, you could do the same thing with a lot of home conversions of the day, especially during the Saturn era. Speaking of love letters to shoot-'em-ups, here's a legally distinct version of the first R-Type ship. Though during the Sideways School, I may as well talk about some of what I would see as anti-frustration features. Just neat little things that might help prevent salt. Your lives are less lives and more HP. Unless you see a little skull indicator where your lives are, then once you get hit, you'll just keep going. Plus, there's two things that your score will net you. The first thing is extra life. The other thing are continues. Continues will require you to continue from a checkpoint, but they're usually pretty lenient. And the second boss is just more of the same, but I'll admit I'm a bit rusty on it. Stage 3 is where things get pretty bombastic. Not only does it add more of, well, everything, as if to build up to something, but the set pieces themselves, again, become more bombastic. You deal with shooting down an entire armada of giant ships trying to laser you to death, a mini-boss that you can steamroll with the charge shot. Oh well. As well as a neat, multi-segmented mini-boss that is harmless, but, you know, it's neat. But the space elevator opens up into a cool scrolling effect that reminds me a bit of Rayforce, actually. And then, after another mini-boss, you watch it blow up. But after you beat a boss that, look, it has lore stuff, don't worry about it. You get your final power-up, which comes with a mecha transformation sequence that varies depending on which unit you took. All of my footage of Rib is in 2020 Crustovision, so you're only getting Deckers here. And with what is essentially a tutorial boss being presented in such a bombastic manner, you might think it'll get wilder, right? Yeah, it does, so welcome to Stage 4. There's no title card yet. That comes at a part that my recording cut out on. I mean, it starts giant rapid enemy chains for you to build life off of. We get a mini-boss rush against a bunch of Buddha-faced big Zans. Ha, ha, ha. I see what you all did there. You also refight the legally distinct ships again. You know, the legally distinct Gradia ship and the legally distinct R-Type 1 and 2 ship, which turn into floating Buddha heads, which, yes, that's what I was hinting at with the Bodhi tree comments earlier. But the Buddha heads explode into fucking Toaplan's skull bombs. And just as you realize the fact that, yes, we are getting Buddhisted here to an extent, then you just go into the enemy base. Admittedly, the start of this section with its sideways scrolling is probably my least favorite part of the game. But then you get this long, fleshy section that has just a bunch of the enemies you fought so far stuck in them and eyes staring at you everywhere. It's genuinely right up my alley, so I love this part of the game, even with the infuriating side-scrolling section. It's a neat section of the game that pulls off a few tricks to make it feel bigger than it actually is. And since this is supposed to be the enemy base, yeah, I've got to salute the devs on this. This is really well done, and they're going to have to try really hard later in the game to top this. To end this section, though, there's a pretty cool boss that is, well, a heart. Though, what's more interesting about the heart is the fact that it teaches you that you could shoot the jewels. As spitting jewels at you that will deal contact damage is its main form of attack. It's another lovely example of the show don't tell school of tutorials. But this boss marks, finally, the end of Stage 3. After that is something that is plot heavy, so I apologize if it seems like I'm glossing over a bunch of this. But this is a mini boss rush. It's full of references, and if you're not rusty like me, it's a great way to build up extra lives. Honestly, a lot of the mini-boss rush looks really good with the game's, well, signature limited palette. It's all greens and oranges with some, you know, grayscale colors thrown in. It gives the game a distinctive and unique look, and this is one of the areas of the game where it shines the best. No, except that one. We're not doing that one. I said we're not getting into plot in this video after all. And then you gotta loop through the game again. At first it'll look like the traditional, it's just the same stage, but harder, but then... Yep, you're gonna see more of the bosses from this point on. And you might go into the revisit of Stage 2 thinking that it'll be more of the same thing, which, well, kinda. You've gotta fight a green onion lad. Huh. I thought it was supposed to be black onion. While I'm sure I'll never talk about these onion lads again, this is probably the boss that gave me the most trouble. On the one hand, it's a pretty fun fight, but I have trimmed out all of my deaths for convenience's sake. Off topic, but did you know you could shoot down the jewels that contain your upgrades? Stage 3 on the second loop just tops everything else. It's no contest. Let's just start with the most subtle part. The track is not an arrangement of a previous tune. The Sea Has Returned is a little wink and a nod to tell you that you're supposed to do things differently. I mean, this time you can absolutely humiliate the mini-boss in 8 seconds. Plus, if you wound up shooting all of the moving shadows along the way, you get to fight this crab. It's honestly pretty neat, cause at first it spits out the remnants of the original mini-boss at you, then it starts shooting out bubbles filled with nukes and bombs. You've got to shoot the bubbles that have the bombs in them to drop them on the crab, but if you shoot at the bombs too much, they'll explode early. Plus, all the bubbles deal contact damage, which is a lot more lenient than, say, all the bullets being flung at you. Sure, you can recover from a bump, but get bumped too many times and you lose a point of life. It's a pretty hard but fun optional boss fight, to be honest, but that's not the highlight. But during the refight, if you transform, yeah, let's just play it. You all have 30 seconds, right? And with that, you get one of my favorite boss battles of all time. It's bombastic, it's dynamic, the multi-directional scrolling just going on and on gives the feel of being over such a large area of space at such high speeds. The mecha Grapefruit fires so much at you, a lot of which are powered up versions of weapons you've had, or at least have had options to obtain. It absolutely gives you the feeling of being outgunned by a superior opponent, but you gotta keep going anyways. And what would be the perfect topper for such a boss fight? Well, if you have the drill, you're forced to basically reenact the finale of Gurren Lagann. That in fact means high-impact, drill-on-drill violence. Now, this is where I have to stop talking about Zeroranger for now, because you see... obviously, Stage 4 on the second loop is gonna be very plot-heavy. Now, why would I want to be avoiding plot? Well, that would be because of the follow-up to this game. Void Stranger, for me at least, is a game that is, hard to approach. It's where this baby comes from. We all love this little larva baby, don't we? Alright. Let's try this. Even though I want to make a separate video for Void Stranger, especially since I don't suspect they'll stealth update it again like they did earlier, because there's so much game and lore in this game. It would be doing this game, a game in one of my least favorite genres that became my favorite game of all time, an absolute disservice to not mention it here. So, I'm going to get a little experimental with this. I'm going to try to tell you how this game ticks and give you an example of a first playthrough. More to convince you to play this gem than anything else. You see, Void Stranger is very committed to the bit. Even bits of the UI can be, well, telling. Really, understanding this game requires you to approach it less like a traditional single-player puzzle game and more like... To rush through a very brief version of what La Mulana is a game that basically does zero hand-holding and very, esoteric solutions are required just to proceed. The reason I make this comparison is because La Mulana is a game that people in equal numbers both love and hate. Understanding Void Stranger requires this logic to be followed to a meta-eidetic extreme. Doing so will both make your time playing the game easier, as well as allow you some understanding of what's going on. But this also makes it a contentious follow-up to Zeroranger, as I've seen some diehards of the first game absolutely hate this one. If you haven't guessed, I'm in the camp that loves this game. Again, it's my current all-time favorite. With certain interests I have, this game goes in directions that just tickles that part of me, really satisfies it. And if I'm wording things a little bit weirdly, that's because I'm desperately trying not to spoil it. Which is also the reason why I did not go into Zeroranger's plot at all. Regardless, let's get into what a first boot up might look like. There's not really a conventional title screen. It just asks you if you want to change your settings and so forth, and if you're ready. And then, in a screen you'll see quite a lot of if you decide to pick up this game. It tells you to engrave a brand, which, okay. I'm sure this horned woman isn't important at all. You know, knowing where this game goes, this splash screen has the subtlety of a brick with a whoopee cushion on it. Maybe a nuke with air horns if you want to be even less subtle. Speaking of not subtle... One thing to mention about this game is you should always pay attention. For example, after you get this neat scene where you get your main tool for the game, you'll notice that you're suddenly locked to a grid. And then you have your main source of extra lives in the game, the Locust idols, which is a little more subtle, it's a little more of a sleight of hand. If you're versed in specific, entities as well as insects, this is a pretty obvious one. Which, to go on a tangent, I am! I love bugs. This little guy right here, Nimble, and its evolution are probably my favorite Pokemon because we appreciate grasshoppers and locusts in this household. So the abundance of locusts makes me a dorky sort of happy. Though while playing, you might notice suspicious little things. This room having an extra space right past the exit is a great example of that. Luckily, you can switch floor tiles around. Though once you do... It's rather squishy and fleshy in here, and I'm more using this as an example that Void Stranger rewards exploration and experimentation. Speaking of paying attention, remember that mural I had showed? Well, if you look at this room... But I think I should gloss over what you get from this. Though sometimes sound can also be a cue, or the lack thereof. This one resulting in a pretty long conversation, actually, with this nun about a 3-lettered censored word. Though that is not for right now, so moving on. The next floor down, you'll notice there's no walls, which could lead you to, well... But we broke it. There's nothingness. It doesn't look like the game's doing much, so I'm just going to go off and hug the little fish plushie. When you boot it back up, it just puts you right back at Brain 28 without having done the weird stuff, I'll call it for now. But I don't want to end the video on that note. Regardless of my trying to dance around plot points and spoilers while trying to give you all how to navigate this game, I obviously think this game is worth playing. Though I do want to note that following the game's release, and the update that pushed this video out as far as it did, it was quite something to see the community around it. Hi, if you're watching, I'm still lurking. Come together in order to figure out this absolute enigma of a game. There is so much game and so much plot in this game. A single $12 game provided me with so much to go through. It's very weird and very quirky and absolutely kind of whiplash from Zeroranger. But even with that in mind, I loved the game when I went through it. I hope to give it its own piece and just dissect this absolute enigma crawling out from the Finnish woods. Until then, thank you for watching this video, and follow the advice of these gifts.